Well, hey there, and welcome back to the KidzMatter podcast. My name is Hannah Peckett Augustine, and I'm your host and the program director here at KidzMatter. Our desire is that every conversation with us would leave you feeling more equipped, more empowered, and more encouraged to carry out the ministry that God has called you to. And we believe today's conversation is no different. We're going to be diving into the topic of marriage in ministry. How do you stay married, be married well, and enjoy marriage while you're in the middle of the craziness of ministry? Now, whether you're single or married, we believe this conversation is for you because these tips that Ken and Georgia Peckett, my parents, are going to give can carry over to any type of relationship. Again, our desire is that you would feel equipped and encouraged, and I hope you enjoy today's conversation. Let's check out a word from today's sponsor before we dive in. Wouldn't it be amazing if the media your kids watch could not only entertain, but also support their spiritual growth? With Minnow, it can. Minnow is the #1 source of Christian content for kids. The Minnow streaming service is filled with high-quality shows designed to spark kids' imaginations and curiosity around God and the Bible. From action and adventure in Young David to singing in scripture for little ones in God's greenhouse, Minnow even has the Dead Sea Squirrels, the hilarious new series from the co-creator of VeggieTales. Minnow's the only place you can watch the Laugh and Grow Bible for Kids series, which is filled with beloved Bible moments, curious questions, and support on tricky topics like, why did Jesus have to die? All this plus classic favorites including VeggieTales, Bibleman, and more. And it's all ad-free. You'll be amazed at how much kids learn about God and the Bible all while having fun. Visit GoMinnow.com to get a 1-month free trial using code KidzMatter. This is a web-only offer. Sign up today at GoMinnow.com with the code KidzMatter. We can't wait to jump into today's conversation, so let's get started. Well, welcome to the KidzMatter podcast. We're so excited to have you. My name is Hannah Peckett Augustine, and we're excited to dive into today's conversation. And I'm a little biased because our guests are really close to me. If you're watching online, you see our names on Zoom. This is my parents, Ken and Georgia Peckett, and they're joining us from Orlando-ish, Florida. And they're going to be talking today about how to manage marriage and ministry. And I believe this is going to be a really valuable conversation. But we just want to start by asking you guys a couple questions, like how long have you been married?
37.5.
No, it'll be 37 in October.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so it feels like longer. I'm just kidding. No,
36 and a bit. Yeah, 36 and a half-ish.
That's awesome. And how did you guys meet? Because we can tell by your accents that you're not from the same place. So how did y'all meet?
So I was raised in England, if you can't tell. You probably haven't heard me enough yet. Most people, after the first 2 sentences, go, wait a minute. But I was raised in England, moved after college to Mobile, Alabama, and went to church, great place. And this lady in the singles group came up to me one Wednesday night and said, I love your accent. You got to call me every day. I didn't.
I didn't give him my number. I was going to see whether or not he was interested enough to find that out.
So that would have been November, December. Must have been.
It was December of 87.
Had our first quote date, wasn't really a date, in early February. Engaged in March. Married in October. Almost a year to the day after I moved to the country. So
it's wild. And
whirlwind.
A whirlwind. But, Hunter and I did the same thing. I haven't talked a lot on here about my marriage, but we met and were engaged within a year. So we get it. Engaged and married within like a year and a half. So it's wild. But when you know, you know. So you guys knew. And clearly you've got some experience under your belt. So how long have y'all been coaching married couples up to this point?
That would have started in fall of 2018. I was working as a counseling coordinator in a local church. And all of a sudden, I had 4 couples that requested premarital counseling. And I was like, what does that even look like? So I thought it would be more of an adventure to do it with Ken because we could give voice to male and female and a different perspective. So I talked to the different couples and everybody was like, oh, that's great. That's so exciting. We want to do that. And then after we did that, the beginning of the year in 2019 morphed into some marriage coaching because we had some couples in crisis and they're like, we need help. And I said, well, my husband and I did some premarital coaching together. Would you be interested in in marital coaching with both of us? And they were like, that would be great. My husband will much rather calm knowing that there's a man there. So that's kind of how it happened.
So for background context, she became a licensed counselor at about that time, having gone back to school after our 3 daughters, of whom Hannah is the oldest, were older. And after this point, having done this, I did get a certified coaching certification, I guess, so that we, had a bit more qualification behind us. So
I love it. So it was something you were doing naturally, the Lord kind of put on your heart, and you began to build that certification, began to say, hey, how do we do this more often, more intentionally? What is it about marriage coaching that you're so passionate about?
I think having been together 37 plus years, we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we've lived that. Back when we got married in 88, there was not a lot of our people that we knew of, there was not a lot of premarital coaching or counseling or, being taught about, hey, talk about these things, look at these things. So I feel like we just sort of were dumped into the deep end, and it was sort of like sink or swim. And we were also raised in an era that you don't air your problems and you take care of it, yourself. And thankfully, I was just thinking this morning, this generation is very different. They don't mind reaching out and saying, hey, I need help, I'm struggling. So I feel like that's very positive. And throughout the years, I was thinking as Ken was talking about the certifications and things, throughout the years, we've always come alongside couples and families and, just some single people. We've had different people live with us throughout the years. And God's just always given us a natural infinity for it. And after God called me back to get my master's in counseling, and I also got the coaching certification, he just began to open up doors for that. And now, we're kind of hopefully going on the road with it because it's looking a little bit different than it did. It's kind of outside the 4 walls.
So just to give a bit more context to that, I think back, wow, that would have been 20 years ago, probably. Yeah, 20 years ago, we were in a church and their master's commission had a couple coming into it. And the husband was ex-army, PTSD, and was looking for his new career after he'd been injured in Afghanistan, right?
I think so. He had an IED explode like up in his face.
But the church, even then, just turned to us and said, would you be their family to turn to while they're here?
And they actually ended up living with us for 2 or 3 months.
But that's that sort of is been part of our journey.
It has been.
Yeah, and I've watched you guys live that out of just caring for couples. I think of the small group we had back in Missouri with, 8 couples of coming in and investing in their marriage and really pouring into them for, what was that, 2 years? So
3, I think.
3 years of just investing, which is amazing. And so today we're going to be talking about how do you have a thriving marriage ministry? Because ministry has a different level of taxation than other occupations, right? We are, to give everybody some context, we're a family of ministry. A lot of the people in our family are pastors or part of the Assemblies of God or, involved in different ways with church in one capacity or another. And so we're up close and personal with marriages that are thriving while in ministry. And so what we're going to talk about today is how it's possible to thrive in ministry in your marriage. Your marriage doesn't have to suffer just because of what you're doing with the church. So I would think you guys have 5 steps to share, and I think we should just dive right in.
And I think one thing I would preface this with is that there will be times that you feel like you don't thrive and that you're barely surviving, and there's no shame in that. And that's where we would encourage you to find a good friend, find a Christian counselor, reach out to someone, reach out to us. We can do coaching all across the U.S., but reach out and say, hey, we are struggling. Because it doesn't mean that you're less spiritual. It doesn't mean that God loves you less. Sometimes the things that come onto our plates are outside of our control. And we just kind of hang on and grin and bear it. And when we can share that burden with somebody else and see their perspective from an outside viewpoint, it can lessen how heavy that feels.
I love that. You're right. We're all going to walk through things. Not every day is going to be sunshine and rainbows. So that's really good.
Yep. So, The first thing that we wanted to talk about was expectation, because so much of the time, the problems we face are to do with unmet expectations, first of all. And, you know, how does that come about? A lot of the time it's because we don't know. And when we get into ministry, and a spouse, ministry and a family, and for so many of the people, kids pastors, kids directors, so often are volunteers.
Mm.
So, it's ministry, family, work, all of those pressures that are going on to balance the different callings that you have. If you're not explicit in those expectations with your spouse, with your family, with your pastor, with your volunteer staff.
Yes.
And we tend to think people understand us. One of the key things we talk about when we're in marriage work is, as much as you think they know you, they can't read your mind.
I remember I said to Ken a year ago, well, you know what I'm thinking? And he goes, no, I don't. And I thought, oh, well, he's joking with me. And I'm like, no, you do. We've been together so long. You know what I'm thinking? He's like, I don't. And it felt fairly intense because I thought, a lot of the times he can finish my sentences. He can say, oh, I know what you're going to say. And it's kind of a joke between us. But at that point in time, he's like, no, I don't know what you're thinking. So we need to be explicit. It doesn't mean that we're not kind. It doesn't mean that we aren't respectful, but that we can be explicit and say, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. I need help, or this is, how you can best come alongside me.
So good. And it's so true. Hunter and I just had a conversation 2 nights ago. We were talking about expectations. And I said, my parents always said growing up, it's expectations, expectations, expectations. And there were things that we were talking about, like, well, what if this comes up? I said, well, there's nothing wrong with that, but my expectation is this. And so sometimes we have to and you can probably dive into this, sometimes we have to adjust our own expectations, and we have to pastor those expectations and say, hey, maybe this isn't a fair expectation. Maybe this isn't a right expectation. It doesn't mean we don't talk about it, but it does mean we say, hey, I'm going to bring this under, reality, or under the word of God, or under let the Holy Spirit deal with that. So what do you guys see in that? Just that concept of pastoring your own expectations.
Well, yeah, because first of all, you have to be aware of those expectations.
And often people will say, oh, I don't have expectations.
Yeah, you do.
You do. You may not understand what they are. They may not be in your conscious level, but you do have an expectation deep down in there somewhere.
And I think, especially when it comes to marriage and ministry, there's this, if one of you is very heavily involved, which, when it comes to kids is often the case, that one of the spouses is the one who's there all the time. Yes, the other one wants to be supported. The other one wants to be, yes, we're all good. But over time, if there isn't a clear conversation about what the expectations are for time, for money, because I know people invest in the ministry themselves, because the church can't afford it. So we'll buy the curriculum, we'll do the thing. The spouse can feel some resentment. They may not be aware. They may have looked at you and said, yeah, it's all okay. But if they've not dug deep into those expectations, the other half to that is also living up to other people's expectations. Again, people do ministry for a whole ton of reasons. 90% of them are good. 90% are, yes, we want to see kids grow in Jesus. We want to see the church grow. We want parents to come to church because their kids come to church. We want all of those things because we're doing the kingdom.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes we also have the expectation that maybe this gives us our high because we get to be seen as an important person. We also have, what's the expectation of the senior pastor, of the other people? All of those things are driving who we are internally, and we have to sit down and examine them so that we don't end up in a place of resentment, bitterness, hurt, and all of those things. So that's why expectations matter so much.
Well, and I
That's so
think
huge.
looking at it from a non-marriage perspective, because obviously,
Right.
we have single people here in this world. What I was going to say previously was I feel like if you look in the dictionary, when you see the word marriage, you should see the word compromise. But I think we can expand that and say when you see the word relationship, it's followed up by equals compromise. If there's not compromise, pretty much in every level of relationship that you have, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a parent, whether it's working with your child, if there's not some level of compromise, then something is probably not quite as it should be. Either you're saying yes to everything or somebody else is saying yes to you to everything. Because compromise doesn't have to be a dirty word. It just simply means that nobody gets everything they want, but everybody gets something.
That's good. Because I think a lot of times when we think of compromise, we think of, well, nobody gets what they want. I give up what I want, you give up what you want. But it is this balance of knowing, like, when it comes to what you were saying, about the, relationship with the church, saying, okay, am I going to buy this curriculum? Well, it may have to be a compromise. It may be something, hey, I can buy this curriculum, but I can't buy the decor. And it's not that I'm not winning in one area, but maybe I can't have all of my expectations. And that's where it comes back to saying, I really think that's a work of the Holy Spirit, and taking that time. It's where we have to build our self-awareness and begin to learn and experience, hey, I do have expectations. Let me see if they're fair. And let me see if they're the expectations God would want me to have in this season of my life.
Exactly. And I feel like years ago that the Lord said to me, if I am filling roles that He has ordained for somebody else, I'm stealing that. So it's easy to come in. I mean, I'm a doer and I'm a fixer. So it's easy to come into, like Ken said, the program. Oh, we can't afford VBS. Well, don't worry, we'll buy VBS. Oh, you need decorations? Okay, I think I've got some stuff in my garage and we'll work that out. But what if Barbara Jean down the street is supposed to be doing the decorations? That's her gifting and her talent. Well, I just stepped in her spot and filled a space that God meant to allow her to shine and reflect for Him.
That's so good. And we had a webinar this morning, and it, obviously this podcast is airing later, but we had a webinar all about lean on me and the importance of community. And one of the things we talked about is you've got to build boundaries around your time. And you can't give to any relationship, including a marriage relationship, if you are pouring out everything you have, not just to the church, but even to your family. You've got to say, hey, where are the boundaries of, I'm giving 100% of myself to church, and then I'm not able to give anything to my family, anything to my spouse, anything to my community group. Like, I've got to learn how to give, yes, my all, but a portion of my all, so that I can save some of my all for my family and my community. So I love that.
That brings us to the next point, actually. So perfect segue here is, it sounds like an esoteric point, but it's a very practical point, is our values and our goals. Because we all go, yeah, values, goals, blah, blah, blah. For those of us who've been in business, we've been off on these seminars and
they talk about SMART goals,
all of those things. But our values do drive our behavior.
They do.
And whether we know it or not, that's what's going on. So going back to what I was saying earlier, our values around ministry, our values around our family, our values around the church, all drive who we are. So if we're not aware of what our values are, and then when it comes to marriage, if we're not aligned in our values, I go back, the verse, be not unequally yoked, applies in such a broad context, because every time there's an unequal yoking between a couple, it's a place of compromise. It's a place where you have to find what is the right place together. The Bible says the two become one. But if you're living with two separate sets of values, you're pulling against each other in what you do. So that's a key element of looking at yourself. So it's understanding your expectations and then going into your value.
And then share those values with one another
Right.
and seeing. Often, I think we're blessed that we automatically find several things we agree on because that's kind of what drew us to one another.
Right.
But then there'll be a couple of things that we're kind of like, oh, I don't know, it's not what I thought, and that's where we compromise. And sometimes we change our minds and we go, well, okay, saving the planet may not be the most important thing, And I'm for everybody that loves to save the planet, go you. We believe in saving the planet. But
If that's a choice that you have to make,
right,
and that applies going back to what we were saying is, your values when it comes to things like buying the curriculum. If you don't have joint values as a family and as a couple, you don't have anything to fall back on to make those decisions.
right,
If you've not sat down, one of the things we talk about in parenting as an example is we tell parents to come up with family value. And we say most of the time, value number one, whether you realize it or not, is probably safety.
you don't want anybody jumping off the roof. You don't want people, hitting each other with piping. Things like that. It's kind of like we need to be safe first.
And once you've defined those values, if safety is number one on the list, well, when it comes to a decision with your family and your kids, it's easy to go, well, I'm sorry, we aren't going to X, even though it falls into value number 4, because value number 1 of safety overrides that.
Right.
It may be you can make great friends if you go to this event, which we want community, we want that, but we don't know those people. We're not sure what's going to happen at that event. So safety overrides. And if you haven't defined it in that way within a couple in all your areas, how are you going to make those choices beyond well, I just don't feel like we should.
Right.
If you have two people having that conversation,
And they're both saying, well, I feel like we should.
I feel like we shouldn't.
We're all in the feelings then, and we know that feelings can really betray us.
That's so good. And a lot of times you have to make the decision before the moment, right? We used to say in my last church, the moment before the moment. And you've got to know before that moment comes up, when your teenager comes up and says, hey, can I go to this party? You have to go, hey, we've already established values. We already, and honestly, the older they get, the more they're going to know the answer. And that's true with each other, because there may be things you may say, hey, I'm not even going to bring this up to my spouse because I went through our list of values and I know it doesn't line up. And I think to speak to the singles, this is huge, because this is how you start the dating process.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you said, a lot of times we automatically have some aligned values. And I think when we think of the term equally yoked, we think of, are they a Christian? But there are so many more layers to values of, you can be a Christian, but how important is it to you what you watch on TV? How important is it to you what kind of music you listen to? How often do you need to go to church? Are you going to volunteer? All of those things are values that have to be agreed on. So as you're dating, and even as you're finding friends, right? Our pastor back in Florida used to say, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. I don't know if he really said that, because everybody claims that quote. But
let's give it to John Maxwell. He's kind of got the question.
John Maxwell. We'll say it was John Maxwell. But show me your friends and I'll show you your future. And when we're choosing friends, we have to make sure their values align with ours. Not every friend, but the ones that are going to influence us, we have to make sure that's in alignment. So that's even just, again, whether you're single, married, dating, engaged, those apply to you. You want to really focus on this point, which is values.
So what I was going to say was, this may sound like a lot of work, but here's the thing: when we do that investment on the front end,
right,
we're developing habits and patterns that will guide our lives. That after a little while, like you said previously, I'm not even going to talk to my spouse about that, because based on our values, I already know the answer.
Right.
So we do the work on the front end, and then that will serve us throughout our lives. Now, can those change? Yes, they can change, because when children come along, things look different. And when we talked the other day in the session that we did for KidzMatter, we talked about how seasons look different. If a wife has just given birth to a newborn and there's a couple of toddlers at home, that weight of balance in that family is going to have to be heavier than ministry. because she's what?
That's the next point.
Oh, that's the next point he's telling me. So, okay.
Let's dive into the next point. Let's talk about that.
Well, now, first of all, we need to say that the practical step in this is to sit down as a couple and agree on up to 5 marriage values.
Good.
Say 5 because you can have 500.
Yes. You got to put a cap on it somewhere.
Right. What are the 5 core values? I think we never did this practically. And we come from completely different cultural backgrounds. The South.
God blesses the ignorant, or he with us anyway.
But Hannah, you knew as a kid that there were values that we live by. You pretty much knew, I'm not even going to ask that question because I know this is where we stand.
Well, and I can remember saying to you guys, hey, we're a team. And if we, we play together, but we work together. And that to me was important. And little did I know that was a driving value, that a family is a team.
And everybody
together. We have fun together. We work together. We play together. We are together. We are that unit that always has one another's backs.
That's good. So continuing on to that next point, we hinted at it. Let's dive into it.
We did. Balance.
Huge in ministry.
Creating balance is so key. And every ministry person watching this is sitting there going, I know, but how do I do it?
Well, you just have to start. It's like, the old adage, how do you eat a bear one bite at a time? How do you make that 1,000-mile journey? You take the first step.
And we all want to get balance, but just like with a teeter-totter, seesaw is the English word. My brain had to find it.
Seesaw is the U.S. word.
No, you call it teeter-totter.
No, I call it seesaw.
Okay.
Saw a teeter-totter. Either way.
We've been together so long, we don't remember what's British and what's American. We're like, zip code or postal code?
That thing that goes like this.
You know how hard it is, though, to balance that.
And so the reality is, as we go through life, it's going to do this. It is. We're never going to find that perfect thing.
No.
We all know, there's the busy times in ministry. There's the VBS season.
There's Easter. There's
all of you doing all those VBSs at the moment and camps. I'm glad it's not me. That's all I'll say.
With you.
Yes, we're proud for you, but
yes, because we were not called to that.
We were not called to that, though we've done it in our time.
Yes, we were called many years ago.
So there's different times in life, different family points. And the key to this is defining where those lines are and what those boundaries are for you. Because we've all heard everything we do needs to be for God. Joy, Jesus, others, yourselves. Well, does that mean we spend every day at the church and we don't do our family? What does that mean? But then we've also heard we live in a time now where it's much more, well, I have to protect my family and I have to do that first.
If I could tell you how many times in the client room I hear, I have to protect my peace.
Right. And yes, the thing is, both of those facts are true.
They're true. And that balance again.
And both of those facts are biblical. One thing, if you look at the Bible, very rarely is it adamant on a very specific thing. It's a lot of principles, and often the principles are competing, and it's finding a meshed point which is right for us in most of these things. Because you go and people will say, well, the Old Testament had the 10 Commandments, and those don't apply today. But then you go to the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus said, well, you don't hate. You don't, it was all
took it like to the next level.
So the Bible so the point is, you need to work that out for yourself. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. But you need to work it out.
Right.
You need to not, just like with expectations, just like with values, you need to examine it and think about it and come to a decision of what that balance should look like at this season.
Right.
Because it's not a one and done. And that's where we would encourage you, anybody listening to this, to take that time every day with the Lord where you sit in the quiet And it doesn't have to be 2 hours. Most of us don't have that kind of time, but it can be 10 to 15 minutes. I follow Caroline Leaf on Instagram. She is a neuropsychologist, I believe. And she talks about give yourself 15 minutes a day to sit in the quiet. And so then, we translate that into meditating on the Lord.
Right.
How can we hear God? We go back to when he spoke with, I believe it was Elijah in the Old Testament. It was in the still small voice. It wasn't in the thunderstorm. It wasn't in, the wind and all of that stuff. It was in the still small voice. Well, that is very hard to hear if there's a cacophony of just craziness going on around me. So, even if it's in the shower, when you're on the toilet, if you're in the car, rather than it always being the radio, rather than it always being a podcast, and I'm not saying those things are wrong, but how else do we have that time to listen and hear and truly find that balance and create that balance? Because we laughed the other day when we were making the slides. Ken had put finding balance is the key. And I said, whoa. I said, I said, you can't find balance. I said, you have to create balance.
That's
And
so
it's
good.
because it's harder to do. Otherwise, we do that elusive thing of saying, well, I'm just, I'm searching for balance. I'm just looking for it, hoping it's going to come
Well,
up and knock on our door and be like, hello, I'm Balance. How can I help you today?
if you're, those old fashioned scales, if you're trying to balance them, you have to put things on and take
Take
things
things
off.
off. That's good.
So it's in those things that we make that definition. And then that means we have to state that balance to people sometimes.
And that doesn't mean that we have to go in like with a banner yelling and screaming, going, that's my boundary. But
If, you've decided that this is the boundaries that we have as a family and this is our time, you may have to look at your senior pastor. You may have to look at hopefully you have lots of volunteers and say, I'm not available on this day. I will not be answering your texts on this day because I need this.
Give them an alternative, but so-and-so will be able to
Correct.
answer your call. But I think back, and Hannah, I don't know if you remember it, we told you girls when you were younger, hey, if somebody asks you this or says, hey, do you want to do this? Please feel free to throw us under the bus and say,
Right.
oh, my parents would die if that happened. No, we can't do that. Oh, no, we always said it's okay to throw us under the bus. And we've done that as spouses so that we like, hey, feel free. If somebody's pressing you to like do this thing, it's okay to say, hey, Friday nights is sacrosanct in our house. My husband and I, that is our night. So, unless Jesus shows up and tells me to change it, I'm going to have to say, no, I can't do bowling with you on Friday.
Even if you just say, well, I have to talk to my spouse about it.
Right. Because we just don't make those decisions without checking because I don't know what's on our schedule.
Right. So defining the balancing point, especially as we're talking ministry and marriage, church and family, where is that? We think about somebody, Hannah, as well as we do, who's been in ministry for 20 years now, probably. And then ended up having children later in their life and had to change their whole ministry life. They're both in the church. They planted the church with the people who have been in that church for 10 years since it was planted. It's growing, but they've had to change the balance in their life and walk through that reassessment of who they are and how their family fit and all of those things. And that's tough.
Let's take a quick break to talk about the KidzMatter conference. You are not going to want to miss this October 7th, 8th, and 9th in Evansville, Indiana. This is an opportunity for you to connect with other Kidmin leaders, get to know our ministry partners, and dive into some incredible teaching and worship. With 6 main sessions and over 180 breakouts, this is an opportunity to learn and grow that you are not going to want to miss. Make sure you sign up today at thekidsmatterconference.com. And don't forget that through the end of June, due to our partnership with Indiana Wesleyan University, students come for free with the code STUDENT25.
Of what you said about it's not about finding balance, it's about creating it.
because balance will never find you. It's never going to show up at your door. That's so good.
Yeah.
It's never going to come along and say, hi, I'm balanced. And most people are not going to give you balance because everybody wants something from you. So they will take what you're willing to give, and not even with bad intentions, right? Nobody is in the wrong place, but the church is always needing something. Your congregation, your volunteers, if it's not one person, it's another. And so you've got to say, hey, where does it look like in this season? And I think, like you said, reassessing that on a seasonal basis, because summer does look different. We know the month of VBS, your spouse and your family, that's where you sit down and say, hey, this is going to be a month where I'm at church a lot. And I've seen families do that. And I've seen families who rally together and understand this is a month and we're going to do it. And then there's the next month where you say, okay, we're going to be even more intentional to have a different type of balance. So I love that. I love you have to create it. You can't find it. You have to create it. That's so good.
So what you just said brings us to the fourth item on our list.
What's number 4?
You have conversation, communication. Almost every couple we've ever seen, somewhere in there, somebody says we have trouble communicating.
Well, those of you who've worked in the corporate world, every seminar you go to, every training thing, it's communication. I worked for a company that was called X Communication. And we always joked, yeah, but we can't communicate. And that was our job, was communication. We couldn't even communicate.
I think sometimes we forget that communication is not just speaking, but it's really listening. It's taking the time for me to hear, what are you saying? What is your heart behind it? What are your feelings behind it? And not always be gathering my defense or gathering my explanation, or even gathering my persuasion, because if you're trying to tell me that in this season you can't do that, it's not fair if I'm thinking, oh, well, let me tell her this and tell her that and tell her this, and then I might persuade her. Oh. But let me really hear what you're saying. And like you said previously, allow the Holy Spirit to speak to me and go, hey, really hear she's saying this is not for her right now.
Right. I go back to classic book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Mm-hmm. Seek first to understand. One of his 7 principles. Because if we're not listening and understanding in the conversation, it's not a conversation.
Yeah.
So one of the things we talk about a lot, and this is something it'd be interesting to hear from our premarital couples if they remember it, but we harp on a lot, is having a weekly planning conversation.
And planning / check-in time.
Right. But there's 2 halves to all of these things. There's the practical aspects of life,
like who's taking the kids to baseball next Thursday? I've got a client on Thursday evening. I can't. Right. Are you here?
How are we making sure the kids are fed before church on Wednesday? Because I've got to be late at work and blah, 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 blah.
Are we eating, McDonald's in the car?
Right.
Are we eating Subway? Are you fixing something to take?
Yeah. What are we doing in our lives just to make sure we're on the same page? Hey, one of the most practical things we tell everybody in the modern world, and we do this, family calendars. Right. It is so easy to set your calendars up so your spouse can see it.
It's true.
I mean, again, we did this as a family, and we do it to this day because we both have completely different schedules. Right. That most of the time, yes, I forget because one of my client calendars doesn't automatically appear on her calendar. So I have to always copy that appointment to another calendar most of the time, but it allows us to see what the other one's doing. It makes it so much easier when you can look and go, so you're busy Wednesday afternoon, da, 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 da.
Right.
But having those conversations on a regular basis, the second half to that is not the practical, it's the check-in.
It's how is this working for you? Right. And one thing that the Lord taught me is ready yourself for the answer. Because, too many times I have walked in and been blindsided, not because Ken was mean or rude, but, I'm just like, da, 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 da. So how are we doing? Thinking, we're doing great. I'm doing great. And he goes, well, I don't really feel like we've had quality time recently. And I'm like, what? We spent every day together, but saying, God, prepare me to be ready to listen and hear and not get defensive. But if that person says, well, I really have felt lonely this week. I felt like I've not been able to spend time with you, not to get my defenses up, but to genuinely feel for them and go, oh no, I'm sorry. I'm really sad that you felt lonely, and hear what they're saying.
Right.
That's the only way we're going to figure out what is working and what is not.
Right.
None of us have a problem going to the mechanic and saying, hey, when I turn left, it goes, and I don't like that. It drives me nuts. But when it comes to spousal relationships and even to friendships and, parent and child relationship, sibling relationships, it's difficult to say, hey, this is hard for me, or hey, I love when we get to do this. I love when you check in on me. I love your encouragement.
And I'm going to say it. How does that work with your senior pastor and your other pastoral staff? Are you getting those conversations you need so that you really know that you're working in the ways they want? Or are you just doing your thing on the side and, you need some feedback. You need some help.
I've had different times where I've had to say, hey, I need feedback. I don't know how I'm doing here. I'm making the assumption that I'm doing okay, or you would have said, hey, this is lousy. But if we don't have that,
Right.
Then sometimes we need to ask for it. Now, obviously, when two people can do this and we work to make it work, it is a whole lot easier.
Right.
If in that pastoral relationship, in maybe a sibling relationship or a friendship, if that other person doesn't really understand where you're coming from, that's going to almost have to be some pre-conversations of, hey, I'm learning some things in my life and I wanted to share this with you that I have found very helpful. And I wonder, would you be interested if we grow our relationship in that way?
And obviously, in a conversation like this, we're giving you things that we've spent sometimes years working with some couples on,
Right.
or you couldn't even do this full justice in a weekend seminar.
No.
In a marriage conference.
Because we spent years working on this, and sometimes it still doesn't work.
Yeah. How do you communicate? All of the speaking ways, all of the, techniques.
Yeah.
There's so many issues in all of this, obviously, that we're giving a high level piece. But probably ultimately the core element in the marriage and ministry is maintaining the three-stranded cord. In Ecclesiastes, it says my brain just went completely blank.
Two are
better than one, because because the three-stranded cord is not easily broken. We use that in our wedding ceremony. I use it when I officiate weddings a lot.
Well, and it talks about, if two are better than one, because if one falls down, the other one will help him up, and that sort of thing. And it gives such a beautiful picture, I feel like, of what relationship should be, the horizontal relationship here, and then the vertical of that primary strand.
So when you think about a rope, if there's three cords to it, if the three cords are like this, it's not strong at all. They're
separated. Yeah.
It's separate. Two cords come together, it's better.
Yeah.
But I haven't worked out how to do this well with my fingers. If the three of them are together, it's much, much stronger. Now, let's accept there are going to be times, if you look at your life as that three-stranded cord in a marriage, where two of them are wound together and one of them's separate. That's going to be moments. Hopefully, most of the time, that one's not God. It's one of the two of the spouses. Yeah. At least, hopefully, one of you is always with God.
Yes.
Together. But there are times. There are times for all couples. And times where one of those is weaker.
Right.
The analogy, Tom Cruise climbing down the mountain in whichever Mission Impossible movie it was and hanging off And of course, the rope is always rubbing on a rock, and
it's always starting
things
to
are fraying, and we're all like, ah, but that's our life when one is in a weaker point.
Right.
But if it's only one strand, and that one is weaker, it's not as good as if the two can help hold that one that's fraying together.
Yeah.
And ultimately that's the most important piece in this whole equation is the three-stranded cord, because when the two of you are together with God,
and you're unstoppable.
You're
because
unstoppable.
He's leading and guiding, and he's going before you. One of the things that I feel like the Lord's been teaching me just for a long time is that he won't take me to it if he doesn't, without taking me through it.
Right.
And that's hard.
Mhm.
I grew up, and I don't know why I grew up this way, but I always felt like once you said yes to Jesus, it was sunshine and rainbows. And that, all would be well.
Jesus said there will be suffering.
Right, there will be suffering.
Yeah.
And so, and now I'm realizing that the suffering, it was something I read in a commentary recently. Suffering for a Christian person is all about that purification, not about a punishment. And if we're to be made more like Christ, we are going to suffer, because down here is like the rehearsal for heaven. And so think about how rehearsals go. People forget their lines, somebody trips, it's all chaotic, because you're working up to opening night, so it will be smooth and as perfect as possible. And even though we know it won't be perfect down here as far as like a spiritual perfection, we're, like Paul said, we're aiming toward the goal. We're stretching and striving to be more like Christ.
So as we place these principles, we grow together, and it gets easier and easier and easier. That's why I think when you see those old couples out, and everybody goes, "Oh, how sweet," because they've worked through so many of those things through the years together.
Well, and they've come to the realization that a lot of things don't matter. The hills that you used to die on, you're just like, that's so laughable. I look at Ken and I, and literally, I think it was earlier this year, we were sitting outside. Our time is usually in the mornings. We have coffee. We talk about the day, what's coming up, what has happened recently, how are we doing? And so I don't remember what happened, but we were discussing something, and he said, I think we're always going to argue. And I said, me too. And then we laughed, because we realized that for us, we're very passionate people. We're very strongly opinionated. And it doesn't mean that we think the other person is stupid or an idiot or that their opinion is not valid. We're going to say, but are you hearing what I'm saying? Because I'm saying that this shade of blue is really the best, not that one. And now once we share that, it's almost like we'll be building, and then we'll just kind of both go, okay, well, we can just talk about that later and it'll work out. So I think that comes with time and experience, and realizing that the other person really does listen and hear me and does give me the space, and I am valuable to them.
Yeah.
They love me, and vice versa. So I don't have to spend so much time trying to say, do you hear me? Do you see me? Do you understand me? Do you know what's important to me? Because if we put that in on the front end, that's going to help. And now we've talked very heavily about marriage, but that's in friendships, that's in parenting,
Right.
that is in sibling relationships, that's in coworkers. If that coworker knows that you care for them, whether they know God or not, how many times have I heard Christian people say, and they came up to me and said, hey, I know you pray. Will you pray for me? Because this is happening in my life. And what a beautiful honor that is, because they've really heard you and seen you, and they know that something is different.
I love what you said about the three-stranded cord, coming back to that, and just I think the picture is hopefully, like you said, we're all staying connected to God. Hopefully the two of us are staying connected to the Lord. But when they get frayed, that God strand never gets frayed and it never goes weak. And scripture tells us in Isaiah, those who run with the Lord will run with strength like eagles. They will walk and they will walk and not go weary. They will run and not grow faint. And this picture of when we're clinging to the Lord, it helps us stay less afraid. But there are still going to be seasons, because that's a picture, right, of perfection that we're never going to reach. We are going to be, until we get to heaven, we are going to feel a little afraid sometimes. We are going to feel a little overwhelmed sometimes. But when we can cling to the Lord and cling to each other, and I think having the awareness of, I laugh if Hunter and I have a day and one of us is irritable, it makes me want to be irritable. I'm like, well, we can't both be irritable. Somebody's got to be strong. So, it's going, okay, how do I stay the strong one when I know my spouse is in maybe a weaker place? And that goes back, what we talked about in today's webinar, to the community, and knowing we have the Lord and we also have godly community that surround us to lift us up when we're both weary, right? So it's, yes, we're the three strands. And then we also look at our church community, our friend community, our small group, our family, our extended family, to help lift us up in those seasons. And then that's where I strongly promote, and I said it today, I strongly promote counseling, because there are things that your spouse can't carry for you, things that you need to work through, maybe from your past, or maybe things you're going through at work, or maybe things that you never realized you're wrestling with that maybe your spouse isn't equipped to handle. And that's where we say, hey, get in marriage counseling or get in solo counseling, so that because your spouse is probably feeling, man, I want to be strong for you, but I just don't know how to help. And so when we can say, hey, let me step into this other space and get some of that out, and work through some of that, and then come back even stronger. So I love that picture of the three-stranded cord. And our responsibility is to care for ourselves and make sure we're staying as non-afraid as possible, right? Trying to stay strong.
And to add to that, I will say, as people listen, watch this, it may seem overwhelming.
Right.
I am sure there are people who are watching are going, my marriage is falling apart.
My spouse said they don't want to know the Lord. They don't want
Right.
to live for him anymore.
We can't do this. We can't do that. Reach out to somebody.
Right.
Reach out. Find something. You may be doing great, but you're looking at this and going, yeah, we're never going to agree on values. We're never going to be able to have those first conversations together. Well, that's again where coaches and counselors come into play.
Right.
They can be the person who help you have those conversations.
Because they can ask those difficult questions, and they can reflect back and say, so, Sandy, it sounds like you're saying.
And we've had it where people say, yeah, we're going to talk about that when we come and see you. We're not going to talk about it together because
it's inflammatory.
So they would much rather come, and so they literally have said, yeah, we don't want to talk about that. And they come in the room with their 3 things that they need to talk about this week.
And that's okay. And that's what we say, because we're an unbiased, entity that will sit there. And I like to tell people, look, I'm not on the wife's side. I'm not on the husband's side. I'm on the side of the marriage.
Right. So, and what's normally happens is over time, it changes because you learn the skills, ways to move forward. So if that's what you need, if you're sitting there asking that, find somebody. I mean, we're here, obviously. Now we're only 2 people. We can't take care of the whole world, but we're here.
A lot of hours that we can fill.
We do.
I think it's the balance of knowing that even when you're in a good place, you want to have those people, because you don't want to wait till you're in a bad place. And prayerfully, you won't get to a bad place. But like we've already said, marriages, there are ups and downs. So when you're in that down, you don't want to be like, talk to, we want to have a plan in place. Because I think we start our marriage with premarital counseling, and then we're like, well, that was great. And then we just, and then we don't get counseling until we're in crisis. And I think we need to turn that, because I think if we were to get regular mentoring, and maybe it's an older couple in your church, maybe it's your grandparents, maybe it's, the pastor that married you, maybe it's a professional counselor or coach, but it's saying, who are these people who are going to come alongside me, so that when I have a question or when I have a concern, or maybe we do it every other month checkup, and we're able to walk through this and think maintenance. instead of crisis, let's work on maintenance.
Yes. That's so good, because I always like to tell people, if you drive off the lot in a brand new car, if you don't upkeep that car with regular maintenance, that poor little baby is going to die on the side of the road. The engine's going to, without oil, without fuel put in regularly, it's going to die, and you're going to be, walking with your little red can. So if we know how to take care of those things, why would we not invest in our marriage?
Right.
There's no shame in it. And I like what you say. Let's do it as a regular. Let's put that in as a regular maintenance thing with, like you said again, an older couple, a couple in your church or in your neighborhood that you admire their marriage, you admire the way they treat one another. You just say, hey, can we fix you dinner, and ask you some questions about how is this working?
And especially if you're dealing with the marriage and ministry thing, and that's part of your issue, be aware of who you're talking to. Find, maybe it's somebody at a nearby church,
Right.
somebody in your denominational network, in your, community church network, who you can go to, so that you can talk about the church. I hate to say it, but you can, and please be kind. Remember,
And respect.
Yeah.
respect
But it
all
can
of those
like
things.
just,
But you
this
can be
is
like,
where I'm
this is
struggling.
where I'm struggling. This is where we're at today. And the person, I remember we had a conversation one time about a church we were in with a couple who weren't in the church, and they said, have you done everything you can to deal with X, whatever? And we looked at them and went, probably not.
Maybe not. Maybe we need to stay a little bit longer
And
and work a little bit harder to know that we've given everything that we have and all that we are
yeah,
to help. And that was so good. And we were not disrespectful. We did not throw anybody under the bus. We just said, hey, we are struggling. This is how we feel.
This is what's happening.
We tried to have some conversations. We don't know what to do. Because here's the thing, we are human. And there's a verse in Psalms that I love that says, God knows our frame, that we are dust.
Yeah.
So he's never caught by surprise. But I think the enemy wants to make us think that it is wrong to have doubts, to have questions, to have struggles. No, we're human. We should expect those. And that doesn't mean that we're disrespectful about our spouse or about working with a child that we're having problems with. But it's coming from I am struggling so hard right now because I don't know how to be this for this person. I need prayer support. Do you have advice for me?
And I think it's huge, and something I had to learn, being in a large church, where everybody can talk about everything to everybody. And you've got to learn who are my one peer, who's my friends that I can trust, and my one mentor, who's my mentor that I can trust. And then I'm not going to talk about this to anybody else, because when it comes to our spouses, I remember I had a cousin that got married, at a very young age, and so she's been married like 12 years now. And when she first got married, she told me how she went and she was telling her mom, not out of spite, but she was like, oh my goodness, this is going on and I'm struggling. And then she was starting to resent her daughter's husband, because she was like, well, how could he treat you that way? And, and she thought, well, that's not what I intended. And so she learned, I can't go to my family with problems with my spouse. I can't go to even mutual friends, because that's not fair, because it colors their perspective.
In the middle.
That's where you need that person that's in a safe place and that you can both go to. And I love what you said about, I'm on the side of the marriage, and you need that person that is pro your marriage, that you can call and say, hey, this happened. I'm not sure if I have the right perspective. Can you hear me out and tell me if I'm crazy? Because sometimes we need to talk it out. We need to feel it out. We need to get through it and then go, you know what? Okay, maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm overreacting. Or the other person can say, you know what? It sounds like you guys need to have a conversation. Why don't we sit down and have that together? Mm-hmm. So I think the honoring side is so critical, because you want to honor your spouse. And I know I bit my tongue and been like, oh, I just wanted to, and maybe it was something funny, right? I just wanted to share a funny story, but I want to cover. We had one time at my last church, we had a little boy during our early childhood, like child dedication. And he got up on the platform and he dropped his pants in front of everybody on the broadcast. And Pastor Julie stepped in front and she said, love covers. And I laughed, but that has stuck with me, because love covers. And we say, I'm going to cover my spouse. So when the silly thing happens or they trip on their face or they're struggling, I'm going to cover them because that's what love does.
That is so beautiful. That has teared me up. I love that. What a beautiful visual that love covers. And if we would be full of the love of Christ, how much would we cover rather than seek to expose and to, crucify?
And that's true of every relationship. We look at 1 Corinthians 13, and I believe in one of the translations it says love protects, right? And so it's that other translation of the word, love protects, love covers, loves, seeks no record of wrongs, all of those things. So I love what you guys have shared today. Do you have any closing thoughts for us as we wrap up?
No, just be conscious, I would say. Be deliberate and conscious on the things we've talked about, on expectations, on values, on balance, on your conversations, and on being a three-stranded cord. Don't just hope it's going to work out.
And just remember, that person doesn't know what you're thinking. We are so easy to let somebody know what they didn't do correctly, what we didn't like, but say, hey, I love you. You're amazing. Thank you for cooking this meal. Thank you for washing those clothes, for changing those sheets, for running that errand for me. Figure out, we love when we're doing any type of couple counseling, figure out what your love languages are. It's a free survey, 5lovelanguages.com. Do that and then work to hit that bullseye every day in some sort of way, because you won't go wrong. We have only so many hours in a day that we truly sit down and interact with people around us, especially a spouse, especially children that are ours. And, we don't want to just be shooting arrows everywhere. We want to aim and we want to be able to hit that bullseye so that they know without a shadow of a doubt, I see you. You are loved. You are so valuable.
That's so good. We could spend a whole episode talking about the love language.
Well, I would love to come back.
We'd love to have you back. And I think you guys are planning to come to the KidzMatter conference. So some of the people
Yes.
you there. So be looking out for them at the KidzMatter conference. If you don't have your tickets, it's not too late. But I believe the price is going up in a couple weeks. So you're getting to that full price. So get it now while it's still discounted at the KidzMatterConference.com. We love you guys. We believe in you. We support you. And we thank you for joining this conversation.
Thank you.
What an awesome conversation. I'm a little biased, but I absolutely loved all that they had to share. And whether you're married or single, I hope you had some great takeaways from today, especially the section on expectations, because let's be honest, all of us have expectations in our relationships, and we need God's help to manage those well. I hope you enjoyed the journey, and I hope you laughed a little bit along the way. Don't forget to check out GoMinnow.com to get your free month with the code KidzMatter. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.